Let me ask you something. If someone walked up to you and said one of the most violent, dehumanizing words in the English language, not once, not twice, but 3 times, and then the institution hosting the event responded by saying, "If you feel offended, we apologize," what would you do? Because I tell you what I would do, I would need to remove myself from that room before I did something I couldn't take. Welcome back to another episode of Her Take by Laila Genius Says. I'm your host, Laila, and today we're talking about what happened at the 2026 BAFTA Awards. We are talking about the N-word. We are talking about anti-Blackness, and we are talking about why this keeps getting a pass when every other form of prejudice would have shut the whole thing down. Let's get into it. I'm going to be very honest in this episode, and I'm going to be very direct and transparent. And if this makes you uncomfortable, I don't give 2 fucks. Because I want you to be uncomfortable. Because you need to be uncomfortable. Because Black people have been made uncomfortable for centuries. And nobody ain't gonna fucking apologize for that. I do want to play a clip before I discuss this. Because I know there's going to be a lot of white people telling me, please do not speak on something that you're not educated and look it up. Okay. Well, do not fucking dismiss my feelings when a person said the word nigger and called 2 Black men the hard ER. So I'm gonna play this clip for you, and I want this to sink in your motherfucking head.
Called 4 Black people a nigger yesterday at the BAFTAs. The BAFTAs then intentionally edited their program and left this moment in. So when Black people tell you about our experience with racism, you should shut up and listen. This is a phrase that we have been saying to white people for the last century. And this BAFTA situation with John Davidson and Tourette has been very eye-opening. My comment section on my last video was a slew of white people telling me that I need to educate myself on Tourette's. It's not that big of a deal. You guys don't know what you're talking about. And I say to you, you are some of the most delusional people known to man. When Black people are explaining to you our very valid feelings of racism, disrespect, and stripping us away from our dignity and humaneness, you should listen. One person who has a condition, who lives with a condition that is Tourette's, that is very real, doesn't get to gain his dignity at the cost of 2 other Black men. Hannah Beekler, who was a set production designer on Sinners, let us know that he used that word more than once. He said it 3 different times to 4 different Black people. First part about this is that all of you are ignoring the feelings of the Black people and saying, well, you just have to accept it because this man has Tourette's. I said in my last video, you can't control the tics. You can't control having a disorder, but he should definitely apologize. And we're not asking for him to apologize because of his disability that he lives with, because he can't control that. He needs to apologize for the harm that his actions caused on national TV. Secondly, the BAFTAs intentionally left this moment on air. It was filmed with a 2-hour delay. They edited out a part of a speech that said Free Palestine and talked about politics, but they intentionally left this in. And so once again, when Black people are telling you the intentionality behind racism, the subtleties behind racism, and just how we experience racism, the BAFTAs intentionally left this in. They said, oh, okay, it doesn't matter, they're Black. They can be called a racial slur. Let that have been something anti-Semitic, homophobic, anti-trans, like that's calling a spade, it would have been taken out. So you have to ask yourself, why do you feel the need to course correct and live with this righteous indignation to police how Black people are experiencing racism when you've never experienced it yourself? You are buying into this rhetoric and white supremacy that has been bestowed upon you that we don't matter. BAFTA gave a half-ass apology. John still hasn't apologized. This man called 4 Black people a nigger 3 times that night. No other person was called racial slurs. Were there other tics that got called out with curses? Yeah. Racial slurs? No.
Okay, so the reason I play that clip before I discuss is that this is how Black people as a whole feel. This is how I feel. And I feel as though that you could have bleeped that out, but you didn't. But make no mistake, if anybody make anti-Semitism remarks about the Jewish people, if they make transphobic or homophobic remarks, that would have been bleeped out. But what's very interesting, BAFTA, you were able to remove Free Palestinian, but you were not able to remove the N-word. Why is that? Well, let's discuss that, because at the 2026 BAFTA Awards, Delroy Lindo and Michael B. Jordan were presenting an award when John Davison, who is a Tourette's activist, involuntarily shouted out the N-word during their presentation, not once, but twice to other Black people. Delroy Lindo later reflected that he and Michael did what they had to do. They had to push through and continue the presentation professionally, because that's what Black people in professional spaces are conditioned to do: observe, compose, and continue. Lindo also expressed disappointment that nobody from BAFTA came to speak to them afterwards. Nobody checked on them. Nobody from the institution addressed what happened directly with the two Black men who were standing on the stage when it went down. And then the BAFTA host responds, "If you feel offended, we apologize." That's a slap in your face. If you feel offended, nah, we are sorry this happened. Not. We are addressing this. Not. We stand with Delroy and Michael if you feel offended. So hold on here. If you feel offended, you couldn't say we are sorry this happened, or you could have said we are addressing this, or you could have said we stand with Delroy and Michael. If you feel offended, as if the N-word is being shouted on a prestigious stage at two Black men is a matter of personal sensitivity rather than a matter of racial violence and institutional responsibility, that response tells you everything you need to know how seriously BAFTA took what happened. And obvious John Davison did apologize what happened, because initially he did apologize, but I just feel that he should apologize for his actions, how it was affected. We're not telling him to apologize for his disability. We're apologizing how his actions affect other people, what he said. I feel as though that you guys have cognitive issues when Black people are talking to you. That's fine, because y'all need fish oil. But anyways, so let's talk about the Tourette's conversation, empathy without erasure. Both things can be true. Tourette's deserves empathy, and anti-Blackness cannot be dismissed. Let's talk about John Davison and Tourette's syndrome, because this is where it gets complex, and I want to be fair. Tourette's is a real neurological condition, and voluntary vocalizes are real symptoms. That is not up for debate, and I'm not here to mock or minimize anyone's disability. That is not what this episode is about. But here is a question that nobody in the mainstream media is asking directly. I'm going to ask it directly to you. Why is that a word in his vocabulary? Because when I was watching the videos on Instagram and TikTok, multiple Black creators who are applying to these palm-looking people, why is that word in his vocabulary? You know, their answer was, you don't know what you're talking about. You need to go watch his movie. I don't need to fucking watch his movie. I need him to take accountability for his actions of using that word in a public setting. That's what the fuck what you need to do. What you need to say is that I'm not excusing what he does, but I'm sorry. You know what? Scratch that. Let me get back to this. What I have to say is that Tourette's causes involuntary vocalize of words and sounds that exist in a person's mind. Okay, you cannot involuntarily shout a word that has never lived in your conscious. So the question is not whether it came out involuntary. The question is why it was there to come out all. The question points to something much deeper about what people carry internally about Black people. Even if they never say it out loud in polite company, the subconscious does not lie. And then there's the response to the incident. John Davison used his Black lawyer to speak on his behalf to essentially use Black person as a shield against accusations of racism. Let's be clear about what that is. That is tokenism. That is using Black proximity to deflect accountability. And for that Black lawyer to stand up and dismiss the racial impact of that word on Black people is a whole separate conversation about anti-Blackness within our community. Having Tourette's does not make you a bad person, but weaponizing a disability to avoid accountability for racial harm is a choice. And accountability does not require intent. The harm happened regardless of the intent behind it. So let's talk about the vocabulary question and what it reveals. Why that word was in his vocabulary matters more than how it came out. Let's break down this word and its layers, because I think people deliberately pretend not to understand the distinction, and I'm tired of it. When a white person says nigger, that is racism. That is a weapon. That word carries the full weight of slavery, lynching, segregation, dehumanization, and centuries of systematic oppression, which happens till this day. There is no context in which a white person saying the word is neutral. When a person of color, such as South Asian, East Asian, Indigenous, Latino, says nigger or nigga, that is anti-Blackness. You are not Black. That word does not belong to you either. You are borrowing the violence of white supremacy and directing it at Black people. When a Black person says my nigga, that is reclamation. That is a community taking a word that was used to destroy them and transferring to something that belongs to them. That is a cultural ownership. That is not the same word. Same layers, completely different. History, weight, and meaning. That is not complicated. People choose not to understand it because understanding requires accountability. And the argument that always comes up, but Black people call each other that, so why can't we say it? That argument is so tired. A Black mother can discipline her child in ways that would be abusive if a stranger did it. Context, relationship, and history matter always. So let's get into the double standard nobody wants to talk about, because I know y'all are not ready for this conversation. The anti-Blackness gets a pass that no other form of prejudice receives. Let's get into it. I want to briefly raise something that people are not ready to discuss honestly. And I'm going to say it anyway because that's what this show is for. So if John Davison had involuntarily shouted an anti-Semitic slur on the BAFTA stage, what do you think the response would have been? Do you think the host would have said, if you feel offended, we apologize? Do you think nobody from the institution would have addressed it? Do you think it would have been handled with a shrug and a lawyer? No. It would have been treated as an emergency. There would have been immediate statements from apologies about how it happened and how to prevent it. The institution would have been held accountable publicly and swiftly. I'm not saying other communities don't deserve that protection, they do, but every form of prejudice deserves to be taken seriously. What I'm saying is that anti-Blackness consistently receives a different level of urgency, a different level of institutional response. And that inconsistency is not accidental. It reflects a hierarchy of whose pain is considered important, enough to act on immediately, and whose pain can be managed with a passive, if you feel offended. The hierarchy is what needs to be dismantled. And BAFTA response to this incident is a perfect example of exactly how it operates. Now let's get into the Michael and Delaware, the grace tax on Black professionals. Black professionals are consistently expected to absorb racial harm gracefully and be praised for it. I want to take a moment to acknowledge what Delaware, Lyndall, and Michael B. Jordan actually did on stage. They pushed through. They remained professional. They did not react. They did not walk off stage. They completed the presentation. And they are being praised for their composure, called true professionals, commended for their grace under pressure. But let's ask the harder question. Why is absorbing racial harm gracefully considered professionalism for Black people? Why is the standard for Black person in the situation to hold it together for the comfort of everyone else in the room? That is the grace tax, the invisible tax that Black professionals pay constantly, managing their own pain, their own anger, their own very justified reaction in order to make white spaces feel comfortable and maintain their own professional reputation. Michael has not spoken on this publicly, and I don't blame him. His silence is not weakness. His silence is a man who knows that no matter what he says, he will be scrutinized, analyzed, and probably criticized for however he responds. So he's choosing himself, and that is his right. But BAFTA should not get to hide behind the silence. His composure on the stage does not absolve the institution of its responsibility to do better. And honestly, I feel as though that, Michael's handling the situation the best as he can, because Black people always are under a microscope, whatever how they feel. It's like we're not allowed to be angry. It's not like we're not supposed to be vulnerable to tell how we feel. Like, this has been happening for centuries and decades, where Black people had to literally be in the space where they're uncomfortable when there's racial harmness is being attacked to them. So here's where I land in all of this. John Davison has Tourette's. I acknowledge that. I have empathy for that, and I still believe the question of why that word lives in anyone's vocabulary is a question worth asking and sitting with honesty. BAFTA failed, not because the incident happened, because you cannot always control what happens. BAFTA failed in how they responded. If you feel offended, we apologize is not a response. That is a dismissal dressed up in a polite language. Delroy Lindo said himself, nobody came to speak to them afterwards. Two Black men stood on that stage, absorbed something that no one should have absorbed. And the institution that put them there couldn't even be bothered to check on them. That needs to be changed. BAFTA needs to issue a real apology, not to the public, not to the press, directly to Delroy Lindo and Michael B. Jordan. And they actually already issue a public statement, which was very tone deaf to me. That's what it came across. But they need to address what their response revealed about how seriously they take anti-Blackness in their institution. And they need to put real policies in place so that if something like this happens again, Black presenters are not left to manage it alone on the live stage. I think Black people as a whole should not be going back to BAFTA Awards, because this is not the first time that BBC or BAFTA has not bleeped out the N-word. Accountability is not about canceling anyone. It's not about punishment for its own sake. It's about saying, this happened. It caused harm, and we are going to do something real about it. Not a passive apology. Real change, real acknowledgement, real support. That's my take. Unbothered, unfiltered, and unapologetic. And again, this is Her Take by Laila Jean Says. I'm Laila. Share this episode because this is a conversation that needs to be held. I'll catch you in the next episode. Peace.